One of the most important parts of The Lord of the Rings is Aragorn's hero's journey, where he goes from an unknown ranger wandering the wilderness to the first King of Gondor to be crowned in almost 1,000 years. This journey is the culmination of decades of hard work, but one question people often have is that if Aragorn was Isildur's heir, why did he wait so long to become King of Gondor? Why did he not go there straight away? Why did none of his forefathers try to become king either? In this video, you shall have the answers. By the time of The Lord of the Rings, Aragorn is very much in his middle years as one of the Dunedain goes. He's been chieftain of the Dunedain since the age of 2 on account of both his father and grandfather being killed within 3 years of each other. After leaving his foster home of Rivendell aged 21, he spends the next 66 years wandering Middle-earth before Frodo meets him in Bree. It's only at the last minute, at the very climax of the War of the Ring, does Aragorn stake his claim on the throne of Gondor. So, if Aragorn had all of this time, why wait so long? And before we go any further, I want to point out that book Aragorn is different from film Aragorn. Simply put, film Aragorn does not really want to be king, whereas book Aragorn embraces his destiny. The simplest answer is, Aragorn couldn't just walk in and claim the throne of Gondor. It wasn't that simple, and this applies to his forefathers too, going all the way back to King Arvedui of Arthedain. Speaking of King Arvedui, let's talk about one of the main reasons why Aragorn couldn't just claim the throne of Gondor. I've spoken about this event in several of my videos, which should highlight just how important it was. In 1944 of the Third Age, King Ondahur and his 2 sons perish in battle against the Wainwrider Easterlings, leaving no clear heir for Gondor's throne. As predicted by Malbeth the Seer, Arvedui, the King of Arthedain, makes a claim on Gondor's throne. His claim is supported by 2 major factors. He's descended from Isildur, who was once a co-king of Gondor, and that he's married to Firiel, Ondahur's daughter. The important part about this event that is relevant to this video is the response to Arvedui's claim, made by the Council of Gondor, a group made up of unnamed Gondorian nobility as well as the steward. The Council of Gondor answered, "The crown and royalty of Gondor belong solely to the heirs of Meneldil, son of Anarion, to whom Isildur relinquished this realm. In Gondor, this heritage is reckoned through the sons only, and we have not heard that the law is otherwise in Arnor." This is a fairly straightforward response. The Council of Gondor is basically disqualifying the heirs of Isildur based on the half-truth that Isildur relinquished Gondor to Meneldil, and that even though any children of Arvedui and Firiel would be descended from Anarion, they would also be disqualified on the basis of being descended through a female line. I say half-truth because Isildur didn't exactly relinquish Gondor. He was going to be High King, he just died on the way. This torpedoes Arvedui's claim, and even though he presses the matter further, bringing up Numenor's old succession laws, he doesn't get a response, and the Council of Gondor names General Eärnil, a distant cousin of Ondahur, as King of Gondor. So, going from the Council of Gondor's ruling, Aragorn technically doesn't even have a lawful claim on the throne of Gondor. To put it bluntly, his claim is kind of nostalgia-based. It would be like Charlemagne coming back from the dead and claiming to be king of France and Germany. Sure, some people might support it, but legally, Charlemagne wouldn't have a leg to stand on. Now you might be thinking, well, hold on, Gondor loses their king shortly afterwards, right? And that is correct. 100 years after Arvedui's claim, King Eärnur rides to Minas Morgul and is never seen again. There are no male heirs, so the stewards assume the mantle as ruling stewards of Gondor. So if Gondor is kingless, why can't the heir of Isildur then make a claim? The important thing to note here is the reason why Gondor became kingless. It's a bit of a misconception that the line of Anarion completely died out. It did not, but there were complications. Here's the relevant passage. Now the descendants of the kings had become few. Their numbers had been greatly diminished in the kin strife, whereas since that time, the kings had become jealous and watchful of those near akin. Often those on whom suspicion fell had fled to Umbar and there joined the rebels, while others had renounced their lineage and taken wives not of Númenórean blood. So it was that no claimant to the crown could be found who was of pure blood, or whose claim all would allow, and all feared the memory of the kin strife, knowing that if any such dissension arose again, then Gondor would perish. Therefore, the years lengthened, the steward continued to rule Gondor, and the crown of Elendil lay in the lap of King Eärnil II in the Houses of the Dead, where Eärnur had left it. To summarise it, there were still descendants of Anarion left, although few in number. The problem was that they were either of mixed blood or their claims were not strong enough, for whatever reasons that might have been the case. The steward was worried about a civil war breaking out should one of these claims be supported, and as a result, the stewards continued to rule Gondor as a middle ground. The stewards were basically kings in everything but name. They symbolically used a rod instead of a crown, they sat on a seat at the base of the throne instead of on the throne itself, but they mostly had the same authority. They were supposed to rule until the king returned. This was less prophetic and more in regards to the fact that no one had actually witnessed Eärnur's death. Once again, also symbolic. So if the actual heirs of Anarion could not take the throne due to weak claims, mixed blood, or the fear of civil war, then what chance would an heir of Isildur have? If Aranarth, the first chieftain of the Dunedain, decided to journey south at this point and make his own claim, he would be laughed out of the building. His claim has already been disqualified legally. There would possibly be dozens of individuals ahead of him, and he has no power base to back him up. And this is the same for any of his descendants. That's why they all stay in the north. If they showed up at the gates of Minas Tirith, they would appear as little more than a beggar. So what has changed by the end of the Third Age? What makes Aragorn think he even has a chance of taking the throne despite the fact he has been legally ruled ineligible? The answer is decay and desperation. By Aragorn's life, Gondor is in bad shape. The Dunedain have dwindled, their army is hard pressed, their navy is almost non-existent. The people long for a return of better days, like when Gondor was ruled by a king. That's not to say that they're displeased with the stewards, it's just that there is almost this idea that a return of some mythical king could solve Gondor's problems. This view is compounded by the fact that Denethor, whilst respected, doesn't really have the love of his people. So Aragorn has an advantage over his forefathers, a little-loved steward and a kingdom in dire straits. But it isn't as simple as just walking in and claiming the throne. Like I said earlier, he'd come across as little more than a beggar. And remember, Denethor explicitly says at one point that he never intended on relinquishing Gondor to a Ranger of the North from Isildur's line. So if he wants to have any chance of claiming the throne, he needs to make an outstanding first impression upon the people of Gondor. He needs to make such a good impression that the popular support of the people will erode the authority of the steward and the legality that prohibits him from becoming king. And it should be remembered that Aragorn was basically practicing for this big moment in all of the years prior to The Lord of the Rings. He was well travelled. He's been all across the north and even into the distant lands of the south and east. He served beneath King Thengel of Rohan and then under Steward Ecthelion II of Gondor, where he quickly won the love of the Gondorian people. He was well versed in lore, he'd proven himself a capable leader of men, he was wise and humble, but still assertive and decisive in action. He's an excellent fighter, capable of living alone and unsupported in the wilderness. He wasn't born this way. His 60 years of experience in the wilds forged him into the person that would ultimately become a perfect king. So, come the War of the Ring, Aragorn is ready. Narsil is reforged into Anduril, and with the major players on the move, he is intent on going to Minas Tirith. If the journey of the Fellowship had turned out a little different, it's likely Aragorn would have went to Minas Tirith with Boromir. Instead, his detour into Rohan probably worked in his favour. It allowed him to summon the Oathbreakers, something only the heir of Isildur could have done, and that would allow him to show up and help save Gondor in its darkest hour. In this way, he isn't arriving to Minas Tirith as a beggar, but as a hero and a saviour. Even if Denethor hadn't perished, it's unlikely he could have stopped the ascension of a king at this point. So to summarise, Aragorn's journey was never as simple as walking in and deciding to be king. He had many barriers to overcome: the law, the steward, and the hearts and minds of the people, and of course Sauron himself. If he wanted to be king, he had to earn it, and the ability to earn that right came from years of hard work and experience. Once he felt he was ready, it was then down to timing, and there was no better timing than the final war that would decide the fate of Middle-earth. If Aragorn could save Gondor from darkness, he deserved to be king. If not, then the tale ends. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, or at least found it interesting. I've seen this question get asked quite often on Reddit. It's not a plot hole, but it's not really something that is clear unless you've read the books multiple times and have read some of the other material, such as the appendices. Or maybe you only needed to read the books once and I'm an idiot. Like many things in Tolkien's world, there's an answer hidden deep down in the text, and, well, the point of this channel is to try and uncover them. Cheers, thanks, and remember, Wherever you're from in the world, you're probably descended from a king that existed at some point in history, so go forth, claim your birthright.